Pushing papers. That's what my father called it when he introduced me to the room full of naval officers, politicians, and distinguished guests. His voice carried across the waterfront terrace with the kind of confidence that comes from never being corrected. "My daughter Diana," he announced with a wave of his calloused hand, "she pushes papers at some government office. Pays the bills, I suppose." The laughter started small, a few chuckles from people who didn't know any better, then spread like ripples across water. I stood there holding a glass of champagne I hadn't asked for, wearing a simple gray dress I'd chosen specifically to avoid attention, and felt the familiar heat climb my neck. This was supposed to be Lucas's night. My son's promotion ceremony at the Harbor Club, where the San Diego Bay stretched out behind us like a promise, where sailboats bobbed with their lights twinkling, where everything should have been perfect. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But my father had found his spotlight, and he never knew when to step out of it. Then I heard the voice. It cut through the murmur of the crowd with the precision of a command given across a ship's deck. "Admiral Rodriguez." General William Hartford stood near the champagne fountain, his uniform crisp with ribbons that told stories most people in that room would never fully understand. He wasn't looking at my father. He was looking at me, and in his eyes was something my father had never given me, acknowledgement. My father's smile froze. His wine glass tilted in his hand, and for one perfect moment, the terrace went so quiet you could hear the halyards clinking against the masts in the marina below. That was the moment everything my father thought he knew about me shattered like glass on concrete. The invitation to Lucas's promotion ceremony arrived in my mailbox on a Tuesday afternoon, tucked between a water bill and a grocery store flyer. The cardstock was thick, expensive, the kind that whispers rather than shouts. "Lieutenant Lucas Vasquez requests the honor of your presence at a celebration of his promotion to Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy." The venue was listed as the Harbor Club, and I knew immediately this wasn't my son's choice. This was Natalie's family making a statement, the way wealthy people do when they want everyone to know they can afford to make statements. I held that invitation in my kitchen, standing at the counter where I'd made 1,000 school lunches, signed 1,000 permission slips, celebrated 1,000 small victories that no one photographed or framed. The late afternoon sun came through the window at an angle that made the dust visible in the air, each particle drifting without purpose or destination. I thought about not going. For about 30 seconds, I genuinely considered it. Then I set the invitation on the refrigerator under a magnet shaped like an anchor, ironic given everything, and started thinking about what I would wear. Lucas had been dating Natalie Brennan for 2 years, and in that time I'd learned more about old money than I ever wanted to know. Her family owned a maritime shipping company that had been in operation since before California was a state, back when fortunes were made on clipper ships and handshake deals. They had the kind of wealth that doesn't announce itself with logos or flash, but with quiet confidence and the assumption that doors will open because they always have. Natalie herself was lovely, sharp as a tack with a law degree from Stanford and a smile that could negotiate treaties. She treated my son well, and that was all I needed to know. But her parents looked at me the way customs agents look at suspicious luggage, with polite interest and underlying doubt about what I might contain. The real complication was my father. Vincent Vasquez, 74 years old and still working 6 days a week at the auto shop he'd built from nothing in Bakersfield. He wore his rough hands like metals, his cracked knuckles and oil-stained cuticles proof of a life spent doing real work, as he liked to say. Real work meant you came home dirty. Real work meant your back hurt and your shoulders ached and you could point to something tangible you'd fixed or built or repaired. Everything else, in his economy of value, was just people sitting in air conditioning pretending to be important. I'd grown up in that shop, the smell of motor oil and brake fluid as familiar as my own skin. The cinder block walls painted industrial beige, the concrete floor perpetually stained with decades of leaks and spills, the radio always tuned to the same AM station playing oldies and farm reports. My father ran that business the way a ship captain runs a tight vessel, with rules that didn't bend and expectations that didn't lower. My brothers, Victor and Ramon, had fallen into step naturally, learning to diagnose engine trouble by sound, to read the story a transmission told when you dropped the pan. They spoke his language fluently. I never could. I tried. God knows I tried. I spent my teenage years handing him wrenches, organizing parts bins, keeping the books in careful columns in a ledger that smelled like grease. I learned to change oil, rotate tires, bleed brakes. I learned that a half-inch socket looks almost identical to a 12mm until you try to use it and strip the bolt. But I also learned that no matter how perfectly I organized the inventory or how accurate I kept the receipts, my father's praise went to my brothers, who could rebuild a carburetor but couldn't balance a checkbook to save their lives. Real work. That phrase defined my childhood like a fence defines a yard. When I told him I wanted to join the Navy, he laughed so hard he had to set down the impact wrench he was holding. "You get seasick on the ferry to Catalina," he said. "How are you going to handle a ship?" I didn't tell him that I'd already taken the ASFOB and scored high enough to qualify for officer candidate school. I didn't tell him that my guidance counselor had pulled me aside after class and said I was wasting my potential if I didn't pursue something beyond Bakersfield. I just absorbed his laughter the way I'd absorbed everything else, and I made my plans quietly. Boot camp was a revelation. Not because it was easy, it wasn't, but because for the first time in my life, my value wasn't determined by how much dirt I had under my fingernails. The Navy cared about whether I could navigate using a compass and a chart, whether I could calculate fuel consumption rates, whether I could lead a team through a problem with limited resources and unlimited pressure. Turns out, I was exceptional at all of those things. The structure made sense to me. The hierarchy was clear. You knew where you stood, and if you wanted to move up, there was a path. It wasn't arbitrary. It wasn't based on whether your father thought you were tough enough. It was based on performance, period. I rose through the ranks steadily, methodically. Ensign to lieutenant, junior grade to full lieutenant. I served on a destroyer in the Pacific, spent months at sea learning how a ship breathes, how a crew functions when land is just a memory on the horizon. I learned to stand watch in the middle of the night when exhaustion makes your eyes play tricks and the only thing keeping you alert is knowing that lives depend on your attention. I learned to make decisions quickly, to trust my training when my instincts screamed confusion, to lead people who were older, more experienced, and initially skeptical of a young woman telling them what to do. My mother knew, of course. Cristina Vasquez kept my secret like she kept so many others, tucked away in the quiet spaces of her heart where my father never thought to look. She'd attended my commissioning ceremony, flying out to Rhode Island and telling my father she was visiting her sister. She'd cried when I received my first commendation, her hands trembling as she held the certificate, reading it over and over as if the words might disappear. When I made lieutenant commander, she'd hugged me so hard I thought my ribs might crack, whispering in Spanish that she always knew I was meant for something beyond the valley. She died 3 years ago, a heart attack that came without warning while she was folding laundry in the living room. I flew home in my service dress blues because there wasn't time to change, and I walked into that house to find my father sitting at the kitchen table, staring at his hands like they'd betrayed him by being unable to fix this. At the funeral, people asked about my uniform. "Navy, right? What do you do?" My father answered before I could. "Administrative stuff," he said with a dismissive wave. "Nothing exciting. She processes paperwork." I didn't correct him. My mother was being lowered into the ground, and I didn't have the energy to fight about who I was or wasn't. After that, I stopped trying to make him see me. I showed up to family gatherings in jeans and sweaters. I deflected questions about work with vague statements about logistics and planning. When I made commander, I didn't tell him. When I screened for captain, I celebrated alone in my small house with a glass of wine and a grateful prayer to my mother's memory. When I was selected for Rear Admiral lower half, the first star, I sat in my office at the Pentagon and wept, not because I was unhappy, but because she wasn't there to see it. My father learned about it from Victor, who'd heard it from a family friend whose son served in the Navy. He called me that night. "Since when are you an admiral?" He'd asked, his voice sharp with something between accusation and confusion. "I've been in the Navy for 26 years, Dad," I said quietly. "It happens when you stay in and do well." There was a long silence. Then, "You should have told me." "Maybe you should have asked," I replied, and we haven't spoken about it since. So when Lucas's invitation arrived, I knew what I was walking into. The Harbor Club was the kind of place my father would find both impressive and offensive, beautiful in a way that would make him feel judged. He'd show up in his best suit, the one he wore to funerals and the occasional wedding, and he'd make comments about the price of valet parking and the portion sizes. He'd introduce himself to Natalie's family as a businessman, which was true but incomplete in the way all his truths were. And he'd find a way, because he always did, to make sure everyone knew that his daughter wasn't quite good enough for this crowd, wasn't quite polished enough, wasn't quite anything enough. I chose my dress carefully. Gray, knee-length, simple lines. Professional without being formal. Forgettable, if I was lucky. I pulled my hair back in a low twist and put on the pearl earrings my mother had given me, the only jewelry I wore besides my academy ring, which I kept turned inward so the crest didn't show. Camouflage of a different kind. I'd spent years learning to be invisible in plain sight, and I was very good at it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The drive to San Diego took 3 hours, the highway cutting through brown hills that hadn't seen rain in months, past outlet malls and truck stops and the sprawling logistics centers that feed the whole region. I listened to news radio, then classical music, then nothing, just the hum of tires on asphalt and the air conditioning working against the September heat. By the time I reached the coast, the sun was starting its descent, turning the sky that particular shade of orange and purple that makes photographers weep. The Harbor Club sat right on the water, a modern building with walls of glass that reflected the bay like a mirror. The parking lot was filled with expensive cars, German and Italian names gleaming on grilles and trunks. A young man in a black vest took my keys with a smile that had been practiced until it looked effortless, and I walked through the entrance into a lobby that smelled faintly of orchids and money. Everything was cream and navy blue, nautical in the most expensive way possible. Polished brass fittings, teak accents, photographs of classic sailboats in heavy frames. A woman at a podium checked my name against a list and directed me toward the terrace with the kind of courtesy that feels like a performance. I could hear the party before I saw it, voices rising and falling in waves, laughter punctuating conversations, the clink of glasses being raised and set down. When I stepped through the French doors onto the terrace, the view stopped me for a moment. The bay stretched out blue and endless, dotted with sailboats catching the last good wind of the day. The Coronado Bridge arced across the water in the distance, and beyond that, naval ships sat at anchor, gray and serious against all that beauty. This was my world, out there on those ships, and yet here I stood on this terrace feeling like a trespasser. Lucas found me first. My boy, except he wasn't a boy anymore. He stood 6'2" in his dress whites, the gold oak leaves on his collar catching the light, his face tanned from months at sea. When he hugged me, I felt the strength in his arms, the confidence in his posture, and I thought about all the nights I'd worried, all the deployments I'd tracked on maps, all the prayers I'd whispered into dark rooms. He was safe. He was here. He was thriving. "Mom," he said, pulling back to look at me. "I'm so glad you made it. Natalie's parents want to meet you. She's been talking you up." I smiled, though the phrase "talking you up" made my stomach tighten. What exactly had she said? Lucas was proud of me, I knew that, but he also knew the delicate dance I performed with his grandfather, the careful way I portioned out information to keep the peace. Before I could ask, Natalie appeared, stunning in a navy dress that probably cost more than my mortgage payment, her dark hair swept up to show off her neck. She kissed my cheek, smelling of expensive perfume and confidence. "Mrs. Vasquez," she said warmly, though I'd told her a dozen times to call me Diana. "I'm so happy you're here. Come meet my parents, they've been looking forward to this." She linked her arm through mine with easy familiarity and guided me through the crowd. I felt eyes follow us, people making quick assessments, filing me away in whatever category made sense to them. Natalie's mother, Catherine Brennan, stood near a table laden with seafood, a champagne flute in one hand and a posture that suggested she'd never slouched in her life. Her husband Richard stood beside her, silver-haired and distinguished in a way that came from generations of genetic luck and good dental care. Catherine, Richard, this is Diana, Lucas's mother. Natalie made the introduction smoothly, and I shook hands, noted the firm grip, the practiced smiles, the quick once-over that took in my dress, my shoes, my jewelry, my entire presentation in about 3 seconds. Mrs. Vasquez, Catherine said, her voice warm but her eyes calculating. We've heard so much about you. Lucas speaks very highly of his mother. That's kind of him, I replied, keeping my voice even. He's a credit to both our families. I turned to Richard. You must be very proud of Natalie. She's accomplished so much. Oh, we are, Richard said, his smile genuine. And Lucas is a fine young man. Navy through and through, I understand it runs in the family? There it was. The question that wasn't quite a question. I felt Natalie's hand tighten slightly on my arm, a small warning or encouragement, I couldn't tell which. I served as well, I said simply. It's a good life if you're suited for it. Before Richard could follow up, my father's voice cut across the terrace like a foghorn. There she is. Vincent Vasquez had arrived, and he wanted everyone to know it. He wore his dark suit with the tie slightly loosened, his face already flushed from the heat or the drink or the general excitement of being somewhere fancy. He'd brought Victor with him, my brother looking uncomfortable in a sport coat that pulled across his shoulders. My father clapped people on the back as he made his way toward us, treating the whole terrace like his personal garage, everyone a potential friend or customer. Diana. He reached me and pulled me into a hug that smelled like aftershave and the mints he chewed to cover the whiskey. He held me at arm's length and looked me over. You look nice. Clean. That's good. Then he turned to the Brennans with his big salesman smile. You must be Natalie's folks. Vincent Vasquez, Diana's father. I run an auto shop up in Bakersfield. Keep the valley running, you could say. Catherine's smile remained fixed, but something behind her eyes shifted. How wonderful, she said in a tone that meant the opposite. It must be very rewarding work. Keeps me busy, my father said, missing or ignoring the subtle condescension. Honest living. Not like these desk jobs where you never see what you've actually done at the end of the day. He laughed and looked at me. No offense, Diana, but it's true. You sit in that office of yours pushing papers around, you don't get to point at a fixed engine and say that's mine, I did that. The words landed like stones dropping into water, sending ripples across the immediate circle. I felt Lucas tense beside me. Natalie's grip on my arm became protective. Victor looked at the ground. My father, oblivious, continued. That's the thing about real work, you know? He was addressing Richard now, man to man. You get your hands dirty, you solve real problems. Not like government work, no offense to anyone here, but you know what I mean. Bureaucracy and paperwork. He gestured at me again. Diana here, she's been at some desk job for years now. Pays the bills, I suppose, but I keep telling her she should have learned a trade. Always room for good mechanics. The silence that followed was the kind that develops weight. Catherine took a sip of champagne that looked more like a rescue operation. Richard cleared his throat but didn't seem to know what to say. Lucas opened his mouth, then closed it, his jaw tight. I stood there feeling the familiar paralysis, the old instinct to stay quiet, to not make waves, to let it pass because fighting would only make it worse. My father had just diminished my entire career in front of my son's future in-laws, and part of me wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. Part of me wanted to cry. Most of me just wanted to disappear. But before I could do anything, a voice I recognized spoke from behind me. Vincent, is it? General William Hartford stepped into our circle, and suddenly the dynamic shifted like a ship changing course. He was perhaps 60, with close-cropped gray hair and the bearing of someone who'd spent 40 years being obeyed. His uniform was immaculate, his ribbons telling a story that started in Vietnam and ended in recent theaters I couldn't discuss at cocktail parties. He extended his hand to my father, who took it automatically, his bravado faltering slightly in the face of obvious authority. Yes, sir, General, my father said, straightening up. Vincent Vasquez. I'm Diana's father. The general's handshake was brief and firm. He turned to me, and his expression shifted into something that looked like respect. Admiral Rodriguez, he said clearly, his voice carrying across the terrace. I didn't realize you'd be here. It's good to see you. The effect was immediate and total. My father's face went blank, processing words that didn't compute. Catherine Brennan's champagne flute stopped halfway to her lips. Richard's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. Natalie made a small sound that might have been surprise or vindication. Lucas closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, I saw something like pride mixed with exasperation. Victor's mouth fell open. And I stood there, exposed, as the careful walls I'd built over years came down in 2 words. Admiral Rodriguez. The title I'd never asked to wear in this setting, the rank I'd kept hidden like a shameful secret, not because I was ashamed of it, but because I was tired of defending it, explaining it, justifying it to people who'd already decided I wasn't worthy of it. The general continued, either not noticing or deliberately ignoring the stunned silence. I wanted to thank you again for your work on the logistics framework last month. The Joint Chiefs were impressed, and the implementation across the Pacific Fleet has been remarkably smooth. Your team did exceptional work. He smiled. Though I suppose that's what we should expect from one of our finest flag officers. My father found his voice, though it came out strangled. Admiral? The general turned to him with polite interest. Yes, Rear Admiral Diana Rodriguez. She's been instrumental in modernizing our supply chain operations across multiple theaters. Currently serving at the Pentagon, I believe. He looked at me for confirmation, and I nodded, unable to speak. The general continued. Before that, she commanded logistics operations for the 7th Fleet. Quite a distinguished career. My father's face went through several colors, settling on a mottled red. He looked at me, then at the general, then back at me. You're an admiral, he said, the words coming out like an accusation. Yes, sir, I said quietly. For about 3 years now. But you said. He stopped, realizing that I'd never actually said anything. He'd said it. He'd told people I pushed papers, and I'd simply not corrected him. The distinction seemed to dawn on him slowly, and with it came something I'd rarely seen on my father's face, uncertainty. Richard Brennan recovered first, his businessman's instincts kicking in. Admiral Rodriguez, he said, extending his hand again, this time with genuine warmth. I apologize, we had no idea. The way Lucas talks about his mother, we should have realized there was more to the story. Catherine set down her glass and actually smiled, a real one this time. This explains so much, she said. Natalie told us you were modest, but this is quite the understatement. I didn't know what to say. Years of hiding had left me without a script for this moment. The general saved me. Modesty is a rare quality at flag rank, he said. Though in Admiral Rodriguez's case, it's well earned. If you'll excuse me, I should pay my respects to the guest of honor. He nodded to Lucas, who saluted reflexively before catching himself. The general smiled and moved away, leaving a crater where our conversation had been. My father stared at me. His mouth opened and closed twice before words came out. Why didn't you tell me? The question hung there, complex and loaded. Why hadn't I told him? Because he'd never asked. Because he'd made it clear that anything I did that didn't involve getting dirty wasn't real work. Because I'd learned young that his approval was a finite resource allocated to my brothers, and seeking it was like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. Because some truths are easier to live with when you don't have to defend them. I met his eyes. You never wanted to know, Dad. You wanted me to fit into the box you'd built, and when I didn't, you just assumed I'd failed. It was easier to let you think that than to keep trying to prove myself to someone who'd already decided I wasn't enough. Victor put a hand on our father's shoulder. Dad, he said quietly, we should maybe talk about this later. Not here. But my father shook him off, his face still flushed, his hands clenching and unclenching. An admiral, he repeated. All these years, and you let me think. What? I interrupted, my voice sharper than I'd intended. What did you think, Dad? That I was wasting my life? That I should have stayed in Bakersfield changing oil? That the Navy was just a phase, like you said when I enlisted? He flinched, and I realized he'd forgotten that comment, tossed off 27 years ago like trash he didn't have to carry. But I'd carried it. I'd carried all of them. Lucas stepped forward, his command voice coming through. Grandfather, Mom, maybe we can continue this inside? There are a lot of people here. He was right. The entire terrace had gone quiet, conversations paused mid-sentence, everyone pretending not to watch while absolutely watching. This was his night, his celebration, and here we were turning it into a family drama. I took a breath and forced my voice back to something level. Lucas is right. I'm sorry, this isn't the time or place. I looked at my son, at his white uniform and his proud shoulders and his eyes that held both his father's steadiness and my mother's kindness. Congratulations, Lieutenant Commander. I'm incredibly proud of you. He hugged me again, tighter this time, and whispered against my hair. You didn't have to hide, Mom. Not from us. I know, I whispered back. Old habits. When we separated, Natalie was crying, not dramatically, just quiet tears that she wiped away with her fingertips. That was the most badass thing I've ever seen, she said, laughing. Lucas, your mom is literally an admiral. Do you know how many female admirals there are? Not many. She looked at her parents. We're definitely on the right side of this family merger. Catherine laughed, a genuine sound this time. I think you're absolutely right. Richard raised his glass. To Admiral Rodriguez, he said, and around the terrace, people lifted their drinks, the toast spreading like wildfire. To Admiral Rodriguez. I stood there holding my champagne, surrounded by strangers acknowledging something I'd kept hidden for so long, and I felt something crack inside me. Not breaking, but opening. Like a door I'd kept locked was finally swinging wide. My father set down his drink and walked away toward the edge of the terrace, his shoulders hunched. Victor followed him, and I watched them stand together looking out at the bay, having whatever conversation brothers and fathers have when the ground shifts beneath them. I should have felt triumphant. This was vindication, wasn't it? The moment when the truth comes out and everyone sees you for who you really are. But mostly I just felt tired. Tired of hiding. Tired of the distance I'd created. Tired of being two different people depending on who was in the room. The sun had set while we stood there, and the terrace lights came on, soft and golden. The party resumed gradually, conversations starting again, the rhythm of celebration finding its footing. Lucas gave a short speech thanking everyone, mentioning his journey, his mentors, his family. When he mentioned me, he didn't say desk job or paper pusher. He said, my mother, who taught me that real leadership means taking care of your people first. I cried then, quietly, grateful for the dimming light. Later, after the cake was cut and the dancing started and the younger officers had moved inside to the bar, I found myself alone at the railing looking out at the dark water. The naval ships were lit now, their running lights making constellations against the black. Somewhere out there, sailors were standing watch, maintaining course, doing the work that keeps everything running. My people, even if most of them would never know my name. Admiral. The word still felt strange when applied to me in public. I'd worn it at work, in briefings, in official correspondence, but I'd never owned it socially. It was like I'd split myself in two, the professional Diana who commanded respect and the family Diana who accepted contempt, and somewhere in that division I'd lost track of who I actually was. Footsteps approached, and I turned to find General Hartford. He held 2 glasses of whiskey and offered me one. Thought you might need this, he said. I took it gratefully. Thank you, sir. And thank you for earlier. You didn't have to do that. He waved it off. I didn't do anything except state facts. Though I'll admit, I was surprised to see you here. You've never mentioned family in the area. I don't talk about family much, I said. It's complicated. He nodded, understanding in the way that people who've served for decades understand. Family often is. For what it's worth, you've earned every bit of respect that comes with your rank. Don't let anyone, including your father, make you doubt that. We stood in companionable silence for a moment, sipping whiskey and watching the water. Then he said, "You know, my father thought I was wasting my time in the military. Wanted me to take over his hardware store in Nebraska." We didn't speak for 15 years. I looked at him, surprised. What changed? He got sick, the general said. Cancer. When I came home to see him, the first thing he said was, "I should have asked you about your life instead of telling you about mine." He died 3 weeks later, but we had those weeks, and they mattered. He finished his whiskey. Don't wait for dying words, Admiral. Have the conversation while there's still time to build something new. He excused himself, and I was left with his advice settling over me like a coat I wasn't sure I wanted to wear. My father was still at the far end of the terrace, Victor having rejoined the party. He stood alone, hands in his pockets, staring out at nothing. I could walk away. I could go home and let him process this in whatever way made sense to him, and we could continue our careful dance of avoidance and surface-level contact. Or I could do the harder thing. I finished my whiskey, set the glass on a nearby table, and walked toward him. My heels clicked on the teak decking, and he turned slightly, acknowledging my approach without looking at me directly. "Dad," I said. "We should talk. Not here, not now. But soon." He nodded slowly. His voice when it came was rough. "I don't know what to say to you." "You don't have to say anything yet," I replied. "But you do have to listen. That's all I'm asking." Listening. He turned to face me fully, and in the soft terrace lights, I could see the age in his face, the lines around his eyes, the sag in his jaw. When had he gotten old? When had I stopped really looking at him? "Okay," he said finally. "I can do that." We stood there for another moment, two people connected by blood and history and a chasm of misunderstanding that maybe, just maybe, we could start to bridge. The party continued behind us, Lucas's laughter carrying across the water, Natalie's voice bright with joy. This was supposed to be their night, and it would be. But it was also the night when my two lives stopped being separate, when the truth came out not with trumpets but with a general's casual acknowledgement, when my father's certainty cracked just enough to let doubt creep in. And doubt, I'd learned in my years of command, was where growth began. It was where you admitted you didn't have all the answers. It was where you opened yourself to the possibility that you'd been wrong. As I walked back toward the party, toward my son and his future wife and the life he was building, I felt something shift inside me. Not resolution exactly, but the beginning of it. The first movement toward truth after years of careful omission. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is. But standing there on that terrace with the bay behind me and my rank finally spoken aloud, I realized I was done hiding. Done shrinking. Done letting other people's limited vision define my worth. The general had called me Admiral Rodriguez in front of everyone who mattered, and there was no taking that back. The truth was out, and now I had to learn to live with it in the open air, without the camouflage I'd worn for so long. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure, and as I rejoined the celebration, accepting congratulations from strangers and knowing smiles from Lucas, I thought about my mother and how proud she would have been of this moment. Not the rank itself, she'd always known about that, but the claiming of it. The refusal to hide anymore. That night, driving home through the darkness with the windows down and the radio playing softly, I cried. Not from sadness, but from relief. The weight I'd been carrying, the constant vigilance required to maintain two separate identities, had lifted just enough for me to breathe fully. There would be consequences. Conversations to have, relationships to renegotiate, old wounds to examine. But for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt whole. One person, one truth, finally aligned. The coffee shop my father chose was deliberate in its ordinariness. Not the chain places with their Italian names and elaborate menus, but the kind of diner that still served coffee in heavy ceramic mugs and called everyone Han, It sat on a corner in Bakersfield where the paint peeled from the window frames and the vinyl booths had been patched with duct tape that tried and failed to match the original red. This was his territory, his comfort zone, and I understood the choice. He needed ground that felt solid under his feet for a conversation that would shake everything else. I arrived first, ordered black coffee from a waitress whose name tag read Dolores, and slid into a booth near the back where the morning sun couldn't reach. The place smelled like bacon grease and decades of accumulated breakfast, not unpleasant, just permanent. A radio played country music low enough to be ignorable, and the cook worked behind a half-wall that let you see him flipping eggs and scraping the griddle. 3 other customers scattered throughout, each absorbed in their phones or newspapers, giving us the illusion of privacy. My father walked in 10 minutes later, scanning the room with the automatic assessment of someone who'd spent his life sizing up situations. He spotted me, nodded once, and headed to the counter to order his own coffee before joining me. Stalling, I realized. Buying himself a few extra minutes before he had to sit down and face whatever this was going to be. When he finally slid into the booth across from me, his face carried the stubborn set I remembered from childhood arguments, the expression that said he'd already decided how this would go and wasn't particularly interested in alternatives. We sat in silence while Dolores brought his coffee, black like mine, and asked if we wanted menus. Not yet, my father said, and she drifted away with the expertise of someone who recognized a serious conversation brewing. He wrapped both hands around his mug, staring into it like the answers might be floating among the grounds. The fluorescent light overhead hummed with a slight flicker, and somewhere in the kitchen a timer went off with a sharp beep. I didn't want to speak first. Years of military training had taught me the value of letting the other person show their hand, of waiting until you understood the terrain before committing to a position. But I also knew my father, knew he could outweight stone if his pride was involved. So I broke the silence with something neutral, something that wouldn't immediately trigger his defenses. The shop looked busy when I drove past, I said. Victor told me you hired 2 new guys. He latched onto the safe topic gratefully. Good workers, both of them. Young, but they listen. One of them, Jesse, he's got real talent with diagnostics. Reminds me of Victor at that age. The implication hung there, unspoken but clear. Reminds me of Victor, not of you. Even his compliments for other people carried the weight of my inadequacy. I sipped my coffee and let it go. We weren't here to rehash ancient history, though ancient history was probably unavoidable. So, he said finally, his voice gruff. Admiral. That's a big deal, I guess. I guess, I repeated, tasting the dismissiveness in his phrasing. Yes, Dad, it's a big deal. There are currently 8 female admirals on active duty out of approximately 220 total flag officers in the Navy. It's not something that happens by accident or luck. He flinched slightly at the statistics, at the reality of numbers he couldn't argue with. His fingers drummed against the mug, a nervous habit I'd inherited and spent years trying to break. How long, he asked. How long what? How long have you been hiding this? The question landed with accusation, as if my career had been a secret kept specifically to hurt him. I set down my coffee carefully, giving myself a moment to choose words that wouldn't escalate. I wasn't hiding it, Dad. I was living it. There's a difference. You never asked what I did, never showed any interest beyond making jokes about desk jobs and paper pushing. I stopped trying to tell you things when it became clear you'd already decided nothing I did mattered unless it looked like what you do. That's not fair, he said, his voice rising slightly. A man at the counter glanced over, and my father lowered his volume. I always cared about what you were doing. No, I said quietly. You cared that I wasn't doing what you thought I should be doing. When I joined the Navy, you laughed. When I got my commission, you told Mom it was nice that I had a hobby. When I made lieutenant, you asked when I was going to get a real job. Every single milestone, every achievement, you either dismissed it or ignored it completely. So yes, eventually I stopped sharing. It was easier than constantly fighting for validation I was never going to get. His face had gone red, the color climbing from his collar to his hairline. I wasn't that bad, he muttered. You were exactly that bad, I replied, keeping my voice level. And you were that bad in front of everyone. Family dinners, holidays, Lucas's birthday parties. Any time there was an audience, you made sure everyone knew your daughter was a disappointment. Do you have any idea what that does to a person over 27 years? He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The words when they came were defensive. I was joking. People knew I was joking. Were they? I leaned forward slightly. Because at Lucas's ceremony, when you told the Brennans I pushed papers in some government office, nobody was laughing except you. When you said I should have learned a trade, Natalie's mother looked at me like she was reassessing whether her daughter was marrying into a family of liars. And Lucas, your grandson, had to stand there watching his grandfather humiliate his mother at what was supposed to be his celebration. The humiliation angle hit him differently than the personal hurt had. His grandson's opinion mattered in a way mine apparently didn't. He slumped slightly in the booth, some of the defensive rigidity leaving his shoulders. I didn't mean to embarrass the boy, he said quietly. Then you should have thought about what you were saying, I replied. You should have considered that maybe, just maybe, you didn't know everything about my life. That maybe staying quiet about my career wasn't about shame, but about self-preservation. Dolores appeared with a coffee pot, refilling both our mugs without asking, her presence a brief intermission in our confrontation. She set down a small plate of creamer cups neither of us would use and vanished again. The cook called out an order number, and someone shuffled to the counter to collect their food. Life continued around us, oblivious to the fact that a relationship was being dismantled and possibly rebuilt right here in this cracked vinyl booth. My father stared at his fresh coffee. What do you want from me, Diana? The question sounded tired, genuinely confused. It wasn't aggressive or defensive, just lost. I realized he truly didn't understand what he'd done wrong, or rather, he understood on some level but couldn't connect it to any intention to harm. In his mind, he'd been tough, maybe, but not cruel. He'd been honest, not hurtful. The gap between his intentions and my experience was a canyon he'd never bothered to measure. I want you to understand that your words have weight, I said. That when you diminish what I do, you diminish me. I want you to recognize that real work isn't defined by whether you can see the dirt under someone's fingernails. I manage supply chains that keep 250,000 sailors fed and equipped across the Pacific. I've made decisions that affected the success or failure of operations you'll never read about in the paper. I've led teams through crises and brought people home safely. That's real work, Dad. It's just not work you understand or value. He absorbed this slowly, his weathered hand still wrapped around the mug like it was an anchor. In his world, value was tangible, immediate, fixable. You broke down an engine, you rebuilt it, you saw it run. You fixed a transmission, you heard it shift smoothly. There was satisfaction in that, I understood. But he'd never expanded his definition to include other kinds of building, other kinds of fixing. I do value hard work, he said finally. I raised you to work hard. You did, I agreed. But you also taught me that my hard work only counted if it looked like yours. And when it didn't, when it took me in a different direction, you treated it like rebellion or failure instead of recognizing it as success in a different field. Victor knows engines, my father said, seemingly at random. Ramon, he's good with bodywork, real artist with a spray gun. They understood what I was teaching them. The unspoken comparison sat between us like a third person at the table. And I understood accounting, logistics, strategy, leadership, I said. But those weren't things you could teach me, so you decided they weren't worth knowing. You turned our relationship into a competition I couldn't win because the rules were rigged from the start. That's not, he started, then stopped. His jaw worked like he was chewing something tough. Maybe it is, he admitted quietly. Maybe I did that. The admission surprised me enough that I sat back. In our family, apologies were rare as snow in summer, and acknowledgement of wrongdoing even rarer. My father had built his identity on being right, on knowing how the world worked, on having answers. Admitting he'd been wrong about something this fundamental must have cost him. Why? I asked, genuinely curious. Why did it matter so much that I work with my hands? Why couldn't you just be proud that I was successful, even if you didn't understand the work? He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something I hadn't expected: vulnerability, fear almost. Because I understood engines, he said slowly. I understood metal and oil and how things fit together. That was my language. When you went off to do things I couldn't understand, it felt like you were leaving. Like you were saying my world wasn't good enough for you. The revelation settled over me with the weight of wasted years. All this time, his mockery hadn't been about me being insufficient. It had been about him feeling insufficient. He'd translated my different path as rejection of his path, my success in another field as judgment of his choices. He'd armored himself with contempt to avoid feeling left behind. Dad, I said gently. Joining the Navy wasn't a rejection of you. It was me finding a place where I fit. You and Victor and Ramon, you spoke the same language, you understood each other naturally. I didn't have that. I tried, I really did, but it never clicked for me the way it did for them. The Navy gave me structure, purpose, a way to be useful that made sense to me. It wasn't about your world not being good enough. It was about finding my own. He nodded slowly, processing this. The radio had switched to a commercial, someone selling farm equipment with the enthusiasm of a revival preacher. The cook dropped something that clattered against the griddle, swore softly, kept working. Time moved forward regardless of what we figured out or failed to figure out. The thing is, my father said, his voice rough with something that might have been emotion, I don't know how to talk to you about what you do. I don't understand it. When Victor tells me about a transmission rebuild, I know what questions to ask. When you talk about logistics and supply chains and operations, I don't even know what half those words mean. Makes me feel stupid. So instead of asking, instead of learning, you made jokes, I said, understanding but not excusing. You protected your ego by attacking my credibility. He winced. When you put it like that, it sounds pretty bad. It was bad, I confirmed. It is bad. But it doesn't have to stay bad. You could learn, Dad. You could ask questions. You could admit you don't understand something and trust that I'd explain it without judging you. What if I can't? He asked, echoing the question he'd asked at the terrace. What if I'm too old to change how I see things? Then we'll have a very limited relationship, I said honestly. I'm not willing to keep shrinking myself to make you comfortable. I'm not going to hide my career or downplay my accomplishments or pretend to be less than I am so you can feel better about yourself. If you can't accept me as I actually am, then we'll see each other at holidays and major events and keep everything surface level. That's not what I want, but it's where we'll end up if you can't do the work. The ultimatum hung there, clear and uncompromising. I'd learned to deliver hard truths without flinching in briefing rooms where admirals and generals didn't tolerate softened messages. I wouldn't soften this one either, not even for my father. Maybe especially not for my father. He deserved honesty after years of misunderstanding, even if that honesty was uncomfortable. He drained his coffee, set the mug down with deliberate care. Tell me about the convoy, he said. The one that General mentioned. What happened? The request caught me off guard. In all our years, he'd never asked about my service, never expressed curiosity about the work beyond dismissive generalizations. I studied his face, looking for mockery or trap, but found only genuine interest, tentative and uncertain. I hesitated, then decided to trust the moment. It was in Afghanistan, I said. Helmand Province, 2019. I was a commander then, running logistics for a forward operating base. We had supply convoys running regularly between our position and a larger base about 60 miles away. Dangerous route, lots of opportunities for ambushes or IEDs. The routine was carefully planned, heavily guarded, but there's always risk. My father listened without interrupting, his eyes on my face. One day, we lost communications mid-convoy. Complete radio blackout, which could mean equipment failure or jamming or active attack. Protocol said wait for them to restore contact or arrive at destination. If neither happened within the expected time frame, assume the worst and send a reaction force. But I had a feeling something was wrong earlier than protocol suggested. Call it intuition or experience or just fear, but I knew. "What did you do?" he asked when I paused. "I broke protocol," I said. "Took a small team and went out to the convoy route ourselves. We found them about 40 minutes in, stopped in a village where the local elder had warned them about a suspected IED on the main road ahead. They'd detoured but gotten cornered in a space with limited exits and no comms because the terrain blocked signals. If they'd been there much longer, the situation could have gone bad in multiple ways." "And you got them out," my father said. "I coordinated it," I corrected. "The men with me did the actual work, established security, confirmed the alternate route, got communications restored. But yes, we got them out. Everyone came home. One of the men in that convoy was Petty Officer Lewis, and he got home in time to teach his daughter to ride a bike, like the commander at Lucas's ceremony mentioned. That's what it's about, Dad. Not glory or recognition, just bringing people home to their families." My father's eyes had gotten shiny, though he'd never admit to tears. "That's real work," he said quietly. "That's as real as it gets." I nodded. "It is. Different from rebuilding an engine, but just as real. Just as important. Just as worthy of respect." He reached across the table, his calloused hand covering mine briefly before withdrawing. "I'm sorry," he said. "For all of it. For not asking, for not listening, for making you feel like you had to hide. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." The apology landed like rain after a drought, necessary and insufficient all at once. It didn't erase the years of hurt, didn't undo the damage to my sense of self-worth, didn't fix the relationship instantly. But it was a start, the first brick in a bridge we'd have to build slowly and carefully. "I'm sorry too," I said. "For keeping it all secret, for letting resentment build instead of confronting this earlier. We both made choices that got us here. Now we have to choose whether we want to stay here or move forward." "Forward," he said immediately. "If you're willing." "I'm willing," I replied. "But it's going to take work, Dad. Real work, the kind that doesn't end in a day. You're going to have to sit with being uncomfortable sometimes. You're going to have to accept that I know things you don't, and that's okay. And I'm going to have to trust that you're genuine about wanting to change, which won't be easy after 27 years of evidence to the contrary." "Fair enough," he said. Then, with a hint of his old humor, "So how does this work? Do we schedule regular meetings? Do I get homework?" I smiled despite myself. "We start by having conversations, real ones. You ask me about my work, I tell you. I ask about yours, you tell me. We look for the common ground instead of focusing on the differences. We remember that we're family, and that should mean something beyond obligation." "Lucas would like that," my father said. "He talks about you all the time, you know. Brags about his mom, the Admiral." I didn't know what he meant by it until the other night, thought he was exaggerating or something. "But he sees you clearly, Diana. Your boy knows exactly who his mother is, and he's proud. Don't take this wrong, but I want to be able to feel that too. Proud, I mean. Without feeling threatened by it." "That would be nice," I said softly. "I'd like that." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of confession and apology giving way to something lighter. Dolores returned, and this time my father ordered breakfast, the house special with eggs and hash browns and toast. I ordered the same, suddenly hungry in a way I hadn't been when I'd arrived. Food as celebration, as marker of new beginning, as fuel for the work ahead. While we waited, my father asked about the Pentagon, about what my days looked like, about the people I worked with. His questions were basic, sometimes awkwardly phrased, but genuine. I answered them as clearly as I could, avoiding jargon when possible, explaining when it wasn't. He listened with the focus he usually reserved for engine diagnostics, and I realized he was trying, actually trying, to understand a world completely foreign to him. When the food arrived, we ate and talked about easier things. Victor's upcoming wedding, Ramon's new baby, the shop's plan to expand into hybrid vehicle service. Family news that should have been shared over months but had gotten compressed into this single breakfast. It felt both rushed and overdue, like we were trying to make up for lost time while knowing we couldn't actually recover those years. As we finished, my father pulled out his wallet to pay. "I've got it," I said, reaching for my purse. He waved me off. "Let me," he said. "I need to do something that feels useful right now, and buying my daughter breakfast is about my speed." I let him have it, understanding that small gestures were his way of apologizing when words ran out. We walked out together into the Bakersfield morning, the heat already building even though it wasn't yet 9. His truck sat next to my sensible sedan, the contrast somehow symbolic. Before getting in his vehicle, he turned to me. "This Saturday," he said. "There's a car show in Fresno that Victor and I usually go to. Classic cars, hot rods, that kind of thing. You probably wouldn't be interested, but if you wanted to come, we'd like the company." The invitation was awkward, uncertain, extended like a hand reaching across a gap. I could have made an excuse. Part of me wanted to. Car shows were his world, not mine, and spending a day looking at restored vehicles held no particular appeal. But bridges require traffic from both sides. "I'd like that," I said. "Text me the details." His face broke into a genuine smile, the first unguarded one I'd seen in years. "Good," he said. "That's good. We'll make a day of it." He climbed into his truck, and I into my car, and we drove away in opposite directions, both carrying the fragile hope that maybe, finally, we could find our way to each other. The week that followed was strange in its normalcy. I went to work at the Pentagon, sat through briefings, reviewed reports, made decisions that affected thousands of people I'd never meet. But underneath the routine, something had shifted. I wasn't maintaining two separate identities anymore. The people in my professional life had always known who I was. Now my family knew too, and the relief of that singular existence was profound. Lucas called midweek, his voice bright with barely contained amusement. "So Natalie's parents want to have dinner with you," he said. "Actual dinner, not just polite small talk at events." "I think you impressed them." "Or terrified them," I replied. "Possibly both," he agreed. "But seriously, Mom, they're good people. They were just surprised, that's all." Nobody expected the quiet woman in the gray dress to turn out to be a flag officer. "Join the club," I said. I'd been surprising people my whole life just by being competent. The dinner was scheduled for the following month, giving everyone time to adjust to the new reality. Natalie had sent a personal note, handwritten on heavy stationery, expressing admiration and slight embarrassment that they hadn't realized who I was. The graciousness of it touched me. She could have been offended by the deception, could have felt manipulated or misled. Instead, she chose understanding. Saturday arrived with clear skies and temperatures that promised to punish anyone foolish enough to spend the day outside. I met my father and Victor at the shop, and we drove together in my father's truck, 3 across the bench seat like when I was a child, and these trips meant adventure. The car show sprawled across a fairground, hundreds of vehicles gleaming in the sun, their owners standing nearby with the pride of new parents. Chrome and paint and the smell of wax and gasoline, a celebration of mechanical artistry that I could appreciate even if I didn't share the passion. My father moved through the rows like a pilgrim in a cathedral, stopping to admire workmanship, discussing engine modifications with other enthusiasts, bonding over shared knowledge of carburetor specifications and suspension geometry. Victor drifted with him, adding his own expertise, the two of them speaking a language of torque and compression ratios. I followed, listening, learning not the technical details as much as the way they communicated through this shared love. At one point, standing beside a restored 1967 Mustang, my father turned to me. "What do you think?" he asked. "It's beautiful," I said honestly. "The color is stunning." "That's called Acapulco blue," he said. "Factory color. Guy did the restoration himself over 4 years. Everything correct down to the original radio." "4 years," I repeated. "That's dedication." My father nodded. "That's what real work looks like in this world," he said. Then he caught himself. I mean, it's one kind of real work. Different from yours, but you know. I know, I said, and squeezed his arm briefly. I know what you mean. We ate lunch from a food truck, sitting in the shade of an oak tree while a rockabilly band played on a distant stage. Victor talked about his upcoming wedding, nervous energy making his words tumble over each other. My father offered advice that ranged from practical to ridiculous, and I contributed where I could, grateful to be included in the conversation without caveat or dismissal. This was progress, I thought. Slow, imperfect, but real. On the drive back, exhausted from heat and walking, we fell into easy silence. My father drove with one hand on the wheel, the other arm draped across the seat back, relaxed in a way I rarely saw. Victor dozed against the passenger window. And I sat in the middle, feeling like I'd reclaimed something I'd thought permanently lost, the simple belonging of family without performance or pretense. When we reached the shop and I retrieved my car, my father walked me to the driver's door. Thanks for coming today, he said. I know cars aren't really your thing. I had a good time, I replied, and meant it. It was nice seeing what you love, understanding why it matters to you. Maybe next time you can come see what I do, he said. I don't mean the Pentagon, I know that's all classified or whatever. But maybe you could explain your job in a way that makes sense to an old mechanic. I can do that, I said. I'd like to. He hugged me then, brief and awkward but genuine, and I hugged him back. When we separated, his eyes were wet again, and he wiped at them impatiently. Allergies, he muttered. All that dust at the show. Sure, Dad, I said, smiling. Allergies. I drove home as the sun set, the sky turning orange and purple over the brown hills, and felt something settle in my chest. Not resolution exactly, but possibility. The possibility that people could change, that relationships could heal, that truth could build rather than destroy. My father had a long way to go, and so did I. We'd hurt each other, disappointed each other, failed each other in ways that couldn't be erased by a single breakfast or a day at a car show. But we'd started talking, really talking, and that was something. The next day, Sunday, I attended a memorial service at Arlington National Cemetery. One of my former officers, a woman who'd served under my command in the Pacific Fleet, had died in a training accident. The funeral was full of uniforms and flags and the kind of grief that comes from losing someone too young, too suddenly, too senselessly. I stood with her family afterward, offering condolences that felt insufficient, sharing memories that felt too small to contain her life. Her mother hugged me tightly. She talked about you all the time, she said through tears. Said you taught her what good leadership looked like. That you saw her potential when others didn't. I didn't know what to say to that, to the weight of influence I'd had without fully realizing it. All I could do was promise to honor her memory by continuing to lead well, to see potential, to bring people home when I could and mourn them properly when I couldn't. Walking back to my car through rows of white headstones, I thought about legacy, about what we leave behind, about how we're remembered. My father was remembered for his skill with engines, for building a successful business, for being a hard worker. All true, all worthy. But what would people say about his relationships, his kindness, his ability to admit when he was wrong? What would they say about me? That I was competent, certainly. That I rose through ranks and managed complex operations. But was I kind? Was I present? Did I build bridges or just cross them? The questions followed me home, settling in during the quiet evening hours when work was done and there was nothing left but reflection. I poured a glass of wine and sat on my small back patio, watching the last light fade from the sky. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. Simple, brief, so like him it made me smile. Good seeing you yesterday. Let's do it again sometime. I replied immediately. I'd like that. And I meant it with a fullness that surprised me. Despite everything, despite the years of hurt and misunderstanding, I wanted my father in my life. Not the diminished version I'd accepted, where we existed at arm's length in a state of perpetual disappointment. But a real relationship, built on honesty and mutual respect, where we could be fully ourselves without apology or pretense. It would take time. It would take work. But standing there at Lucas's ceremony with my rank finally spoken aloud, with my father's certainty shattered and my own walls crumbling, I'd glimpsed the possibility of something better. And possibility, I'd learned in my years of service, was where every mission began. You identified the objective, assessed the resources, planned the approach, and then you executed with faith that the plan would hold even when circumstances changed. My father and I were on a new mission now, with an objective neither of us could fully articulate but both of us wanted. To know each other truly. To respect each other fully. To find the common ground between engines and logistics, between Bakersfield and the Pentagon, between who we'd been and who we could still become. The path wasn't clear, and the obstacles were numerous. But we'd started walking, together, and that was enough for now. The invitation came on official Navy letterhead, though the tone was anything but formal. Diana, it read in General Hartford's distinctive handwriting at the bottom of a printed memo, I'm hosting a small gathering at my home next month for retiring officers and their families. I'd be honored if you'd attend and bring your father as my guest. I think he'd enjoy meeting some of the people whose lives you've touched. No pressure, but the offer stands. Bill. I read it 3 times, standing in my kitchen with my morning coffee growing cold. The gesture was thoughtful, almost impossibly so. General Hartford ran in circles where a personal invitation carried weight, where access meant something. He was offering my father a window into my world, not the technical details of supply chain management or operational logistics, but the human element. The people. The impact. The reality of what serving meant beyond the abstractions. I texted my father before I could talk myself out of it. Got an invitation to a military event next month. Small gathering, very casual. Would you want to come with me? The response took 20 minutes, which meant he was thinking about it, probably asking Victor or Googling what people wore to military gatherings, worrying about saying the wrong thing or looking foolish. Finally, what kind of event? Who'll be there? Retirement party basically, I replied. Hosted by a general I work with. Mix of officers and families. Backyard barbecue type thing, not fancy. Another pause, shorter this time. Will people expect me to know military stuff? Only if you want to learn some, I wrote back. Mostly they'll just want to meet you. You're welcome to say no, Dad. No obligation. The phone rang instead of another text. His voice when I answered carried that particular gruffness that meant he was feeling uncertain but trying not to show it. I want to go, he said. If you're sure I won't embarrass you. You won't embarrass me, I said, then reconsidered. Well, probably not. Just be yourself and listen more than you talk. These are good people, Dad. They'll be kind. What do I wear? He asked, and I heard the vulnerability under the practical question. Slacks and a button-down shirt, I said. Think church but slightly more relaxed. And Dad? Yeah. Thank you for being willing to try this. It means a lot. There was a long pause filled with unspoken things, years of distance and recent attempts at bridging it, hope and fear mixed together. See you next month, he said finally, and hung up before either of us could get more emotional than we already were. The weeks leading up to the gathering passed in the usual blur of work and routine. I briefed the Secretary of the Navy on Pacific Fleet readiness, sat through interminable budget meetings where every line item became a battlefield, mediated a dispute between 2 commanders who both wanted the same limited resources. The work was important and exhausting in equal measure, the kind of tired that comes from making decisions that matter while knowing you'll never have perfect information or enough time. Lucas called weekly, his voice always bright with newlywed happiness that made my heart swell. Natalie said to tell you they're planning a family dinner soon, he mentioned during one call. Her parents really do want to get to know you better. How's that feel? Terrifying, I admitted. But good terrifying. Like jumping out of a plane with a parachute you packed yourself. You're going to be fine, Mom, he said with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted me. They already respect you. Now they just want to like you too. The dinner with the Brennans happened on a Thursday evening at their home in La Jolla, a sprawling Mediterranean-style house with ocean views and the kind of landscaping that required a full-time gardener. Catherine greeted me at the door with a warmth that felt genuine rather than performative, and Richard shook my hand with the firm grip of someone who'd reassessed their initial judgment and decided to start fresh. Over Chilean sea bass and wine that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, we talked about everything except the obvious. They asked about my childhood in Bakersfield, and I gave them the edited version, the one that emphasized hard work and family values without dwelling on the complicated parts. I asked about their business, and they explained maritime shipping with the enthusiasm of people who genuinely loved what they did. We found common ground in logistics, in the challenge of moving resources efficiently across vast distances, in the satisfaction of solving complex problems. It wasn't until dessert, some architectural creation involving chocolate and gold leaf that seemed too beautiful to eat, that Catherine brought up the ceremony. "I want to apologize again," she said, setting down her fork. "We made assumptions based on appearances, and that was unfair. You were so quiet, so unassuming, and we mistook that for lack of accomplishment rather than recognizing it as confidence that doesn't need to announce itself." "We all make assumptions," I said. "I let you make them because it was easier than explaining." "That's on me too." Richard leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine thoughtfully. "What made you choose the Navy?" he asked. "Was it always the plan, or did you stumble into it?" I told them about the guidance counselor, about my father's reaction, about shipping out and finding a world that made sense in ways my hometown never had. I told them about my first deployment, about learning to navigate by stars when the equipment failed, about the satisfaction of bringing a ship into port after months at sea. I told them things I rarely shared, and they listened with the kind of attention that makes you want to keep talking, that makes you feel heard rather than just politely tolerated. When I left that night, Catherine hugged me at the door. "You've raised a remarkable son," she said. "And I'm beginning to understand where he learned his strength." The compliment settled warm in my chest during the drive home, validation from an unexpected source. Maybe this was what healing looked like, not dramatic declarations or tearful reconciliations, but quiet moments of connection that accumulated into something solid. The night before General Hartford's gathering, I couldn't sleep. Not from anxiety exactly, more from the weight of what the next day represented. My father entering my world, seeing me through the eyes of people who knew my work, who respected my leadership, who understood the weight of the responsibilities I carried. There was vulnerability in that, the risk that he might still find ways to diminish it, might make jokes that would sting worse coming in front of my colleagues. But there was also hope. Hope that seeing me in context, surrounded by evidence of competence and respect, might shift something fundamental in how he saw me. That the abstract concept of Admiral might become real and human and worthy of pride. I got up at 2 a.m. and made tea, sitting at my kitchen table with only the under-cabinet lights for illumination, and thought about all the versions of myself I'd been over the years. The daughter who couldn't please her father. The sailor who found her footing on unstable decks. The officer who learned to lead by example rather than volume. The commander who brought people home. The admiral who'd finally stopped hiding. All of those selves were real, were me, but I'd kept them separated like ingredients that might explode if combined. Tomorrow they'd all exist in the same space, and I had to trust that the mixture would hold. My father arrived at my house at noon, dressed in navy slacks and a light blue button-down shirt that looked new, the creases from the package still visible. He'd shaved carefully, missed a small patch under his jaw, and his hair was combed with the kind of attention that revealed nervousness. "I'm not good at these things," he said by way of greeting. "Just tell me if I'm screwing up." "You'll be fine," I assured him, though my own stomach was tight with uncertainty. "We're just people, Dad. They put on uniforms and serve, but underneath they're just people trying to do their jobs well and take care of their families. You understand that better than you think." We drove to General Hartford's home in Bethesda, a brick colonial with a sprawling backyard that backed up to woods. Cars already lined the street, and I could hear music and voices drifting from the back of the house. My father straightened his collar 3 times before we got out of the car. General Hartford met us at the side gate, dressed in civilian clothes, jeans and a polo shirt that made him look like any other suburban dad hosting a cookout. Diana, he said warmly, gripping my hand. And you must be Vincent. Bill Hartford. Thank you for coming. My father shook his hand with the extra firmness of someone trying to project confidence. Thank you for having me, sir. I appreciate the invitation. No sir necessary today, the general said easily. It's Bill, and you're doing me a favor. Diana's too modest to tell you herself, but she's one of the finest officers I've had the privilege of working with. I've been wanting to meet the man who raised her. My father blinked at that, recalibrating. The general gestured toward the backyard. Come on, let me introduce you around. Fair warning, there's a lot of shop talk, but there's also good barbecue and cold beer, so you can tune us out anytime it gets boring. The backyard was crowded with maybe 40 people, a mix of uniforms and civilian clothes, ages ranging from 20s to 70s. A grill smoked in one corner where a captain I recognized from Joint Staff was holding court over ribs and chicken. Children ran through a sprinkler, shrieking with joy. A cluster of officers stood near a cooler debating the merits of different naval vessels with the intensity of sports fans arguing team rosters. It was relaxed and warm and completely unlike the formal military functions I usually attended. General Hartford was true to his word, introducing my father to small groups, providing context that helped bridge the civilian-military gap. This is Commander Peters, just back from a deployment to the Mediterranean. Spent 8 months keeping supply lines open for NATO operations. And this is Vincent, Diana's father, runs an auto repair business in California. The introductions were smooth, finding points of connection, making space for my father to contribute without putting him on the spot. I watched him talk to Commander Peters about the challenges of maintaining equipment in harsh environments, finding common ground between ship systems and car engines. I watched him listen to a recently retired colonel describe 30 years of service with genuine interest rather than the glazed politeness of someone waiting for their turn to talk. I watched him slowly relax, his shoulders dropping, his smile becoming natural rather than forced. At one point, a lieutenant commander named Sarah Chin approached me, her 4-year-old daughter attached to her leg. Admiral Rodriguez, she said, then caught herself. Sorry, Diana. Force of habit. I wanted to thank you again for writing that recommendation letter. I got the assignment I requested, partly because of your endorsement. It means everything. I'm glad it worked out, I said warmly. You earned it with your performance. Sarah glanced at my father. Is this your dad? When I nodded, she turned to him with a bright smile. Your daughter changed my career trajectory, Mr. Vasquez. I was stuck in a position where I wasn't being utilized well, and she noticed. She advocated for me, mentored me, helped me see possibilities I'd stopped believing in. I tell my daughter about Admiral Rodriguez when we talk about strong women. You should be incredibly proud. My father's face did something complicated, emotions flickering too fast to name. Thank you, he managed. That's good to hear. After Sarah moved on, he stood quietly for a moment. That happens a lot, he asked. People coming up to thank you? More than I expect, I admitted. Usually I just see it as doing my job, helping good people reach their potential. But yeah, it happens. He absorbed this, watching the crowd with new eyes. That woman called you Admiral like it was natural, he said. Like it was just your name. Because to them it is, I replied. To them I'm not Diana who's trying to prove something or Diana who should have learned a trade. I'm Admiral Rodriguez who signs their orders and writes their evaluations and fights for their careers. It's simpler that way. My father nodded slowly. I'm starting to understand that, he said. What you do here, it's not about paperwork. It's about people. I've been thinking about it wrong this whole time. It is about people, I confirmed. The paperwork is just the mechanism. But at the end of the day, I'm responsible for making sure sailors and officers have what they need to do their jobs safely and successfully. That's the real work. A voice called out from near the grill. Diana, you want your ribs burnt or just crispy? I laughed and headed over, my father following. The captain manning the grill, Tom Washington, grinned at me. Your friend Bill told me you like your barbecue with character, which I interpret as slightly overcooked. That interpretation is correct, I confirmed. Captain Washington, this is my father Vincent. Dad, Tom and I served together on a destroyer about 15 years ago. Back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, Tom said, shaking my father's hand. Your daughter was the only one who could keep the supply system from completely falling apart. We'd have been eating MREs for months without her. That's her gift, making chaos look organized. My father smiled, and I could see him collecting these testimonials like evidence, building a case for a conclusion he'd resisted for decades. Throughout the afternoon, more people approached with similar stories. A commander who credited me with helping him through a crisis of confidence. A retired admiral who remembered me as a lieutenant and marveled at how far I'd risen. A civilian contractor who worked with my office and praised my efficiency and fairness. Each conversation was a thread in a larger tapestry, and my father was seeing the full picture for the first time. Not just his daughter who'd gone off and done something he didn't understand, but a leader who'd impacted dozens, maybe hundreds of lives. A professional who'd earned respect through competence and character. A person whose work mattered in ways that might not leave grease under the fingernails but left marks on human lives. As the sun started to set and families began gathering their children for departure, General Hartford pulled my father aside for a private conversation. I watched from across the yard, unable to hear but reading body language. The general talked, my father listened, nodded, asked questions. Whatever was said made my father's eyes go bright, made him glance at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Later, driving home in the gathering dusk, my father was quiet for a long time. Then, the general told me about that convoy, he said. The one in Afghanistan you mentioned. He told me the whole story, not just the sanitized version. Said you disobeyed direct orders to go after those men, risked your career and your life because you knew they needed help. I kept my eyes on the road. Protocol would have had them wait longer, possibly too long. I made a judgment call. You made the right call, my father said. And apparently you've made a lot of right calls over the years. That general, Bill, he said you're being considered for promotion to Rear Admiral upper half. 2 stars. Said it's not guaranteed, but you're competitive, which apparently means something in your world. It means I have a chance, I said. Whether it happens or not depends on a lot of factors beyond my control. He was quiet again, processing. Then, I told him I didn't know my daughter, he said, his voice rough. Told him I'd spent your whole life looking at you and seeing the wrong things. He said it's never too late to start seeing clearly, that people change when they decide the cost of staying the same is too high. Is the cost too high? I asked gently. For you? He didn't answer immediately. We drove past shopping centers and residential neighborhoods, past the landscape of ordinary American life continuing in its usual patterns. Finally, I spent today watching strangers light up when they talked about you, he said. I watched grown men and women, people who've seen combat and led thousands, treat you with genuine respect. I heard your boss, a 3-star general, call you one of the finest officers he knows. And I realized I'd been so focused on you not being what I expected that I completely missed who you actually are. The words landed heavy and real, the kind of admission that costs something to make. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Who am I, Dad? What do you see now? He took a shaky breath. I see someone who leads by making others stronger. Someone who risks herself to protect people she's responsible for. Someone who built a career on competence and character in a field I don't understand but can finally respect. I see my daughter, and I see an admiral, and I'm starting to understand those aren't different people. They're the same person, and she's remarkable. I had to pull over. My vision blurred with tears I'd been holding back all day, all month, all decade. I pulled into a grocery store parking lot and put the car in park and let myself cry while my father sat beside me, his hand awkward but present on my shoulder. I'm sorry, he said quietly. For all of it. For making you hide, for making you small, for wasting years we could have spent actually knowing each other. I'm so damn sorry, Diana. I know, I managed through tears. I know you are. We sat there as the sky darkened and the parking lot emptied, as the world moved around us indifferent to our reconciliation. Eventually I wiped my eyes and drove us home, both of us quiet but the silence comfortable now, companionable. When I dropped him at his truck back at my house, he hugged me tight. I'm proud of you, he said into my hair. I should have said it 27 years ago, but I'm saying it now. I'm so proud of who you are and what you've accomplished. Thank you, I whispered. That means more than you know. After he left, I sat in my driveway for a long time, lights off, just breathing. Something had fundamentally shifted today. Not fixed, relationships this broken didn't fix in an afternoon, but shifted. My father had seen me truly, completely, and hadn't turned away. He'd leaned in. That was enough for now. That was everything. The next morning, I woke to a text from Lucas. Grandpa called me last night. Talked for an hour about your barbecue and the people he met. Mom, he was crying. Happy crying. Said he finally understands what you do and why it matters. I don't know what happened yesterday, but thank you. I replied with a simple heart emoji, too full to form words. Then I got up and made coffee and started my day, carrying the previous afternoon like a warmth in my chest. The work was the same, reports and briefings and decisions that would ripple out in ways I'd never fully trace. But I did it now without the weight of hiding, without the exhaustion of maintaining separate selves. That evening, an email arrived from my father. The subject line read, "Learning." The message was brief, in his characteristic style. Diana, I want to understand your work better. Can you recommend some books or articles that would help me learn about naval operations and logistics? I've got time to read now that I'm cutting back hours at the shop. Also, would you be willing to give me a tour of your office sometime? I'd like to see where you work. Dad. I read it twice, then a third time, feeling something settle into place. Yes, I wrote back. I can do that. I'd be honored to do that. And just like that, we began the real work of building a relationship on truth instead of assumption, on curiosity instead of judgment, on the person I actually was instead of the one he decided I should be. It wouldn't be perfect. We'd stumble, misunderstand, frustrate each other. But we'd do it honestly, and that made all the difference. The Pentagon tour happened on a Wednesday morning when the building hummed with its usual controlled chaos. I met my father at the river entrance, watching him navigate the security checkpoint with the cautious attention of someone entering unfamiliar territory. He dressed carefully again, slacks and a pressed shirt, and carried a small notebook in his pocket like he was preparing for an exam. The gesture touched me more than I'd expected. Walking through the corridors, I explained the building's layout, the 5 concentric rings, the way departments were organized, the sheer scale of an operation that employed over 20,000 people in this single structure. My father listened intently, asking questions about things I'd stopped noticing years ago. How do people not get lost? Do you really walk miles every day just getting between meetings? Where do all these people eat lunch? My office was modest compared to some, a space with a window overlooking a courtyard, walls covered with maps and organizational charts, a desk perpetually threatening to disappear under reports and briefing books. My assistant, a sharp lieutenant named Marcus Webb, stood when we entered. "Sir," he said, then caught himself. "Ma'am, apologies. Your 9:30 called to reschedule." "Good morning, Mr. Vasquez, the Admiral has told us you'd be visiting." "Marcus," I said, "this is my father Vincent." "Dad, Lieutenant Webb keeps my professional life from completely derailing." Marcus smiled and shook my father's hand. "She's being modest, sir. The Admiral runs one of the tightest operations in the building. I've worked for 3 flag officers, and none of them managed their portfolio with this level of precision." My father glanced at me with something like wonder. "That so?" "Absolutely," Marcus confirmed. "Last month we had a crisis with a delayed supply shipment to the 7th Fleet. Most offices would have panicked or pushed it up the chain. Admiral Rodriguez convened the right people, identified the bottleneck, and had it resolved in 6 hours. 300 sailors got their equipment on time because she refused to accept that the system was broken. She just found another way through it. I felt my face warm. Marcus is exaggerating. I'm really not, Marcus said cheerfully. But I'll let you two have your tour. Admiral, your 10:30 is in conference room 4B, and I've printed the briefing materials. He excused himself, leaving us alone in my office. My father walked slowly around the space, examining the framed certificates on the walls, the challenge coins displayed on a shelf, the photographs of ships and ceremonies and change of command events. He stopped at one photo in particular, me standing on a flight deck shaking hands with a young sailor, both of us grinning. When was this? He asked. 5 years ago, I said, moving to stand beside him. That's Petty Officer Rodriguez, no relation. She'd just been promoted and was receiving an award for exceptional performance. I happened to be visiting the ship for an inspection, and someone thought it would be funny to get the two Rodriguezes together for a picture. She sent me a holiday card every year now. Updates me on her career. She made chief last year. You stay in touch with people, my father said. It wasn't a question, more an observation he was testing against his assumptions. When I can, I replied. Not everyone, that would be impossible. But the ones who reach out, who want mentorship or advice or just someone to celebrate their wins with, I try to make time. It matters to them, so it matters to me. He nodded slowly, then turned to look at me directly. Show me what you do, he said. Not the classified stuff, I know there's limits. But a regular day. Help me understand what fills your time. I pulled up a chair beside mine at the desk and walked him through my calendar. Morning intelligence briefing at 0700, reviewing overnight developments that might impact naval operations. Staff meeting at 0830 with my team, checking on various projects and initiatives. The 10:30 meeting he'd already heard about, a working group on improving maintenance cycles for surface ships. Lunch would be at my desk while reviewing budget proposals. Afternoon would include a video conference with commanders in the Pacific, a personnel review board, and preparation for tomorrow's brief to the Joint Chiefs. As I explained each item, I could see him connecting dots, understanding that administration wasn't meaningless paperwork but the machinery that kept operations running. The budget decisions meant ships got repaired or didn't. The personnel reviews meant talented officers advanced or stagnated. The intelligence briefings meant I could anticipate problems before they became crises. Every meeting, every report, every decision rippled outward into the lives of thousands of sailors I'd never meet but was responsible for nonetheless. That sounds exhausting, he said finally. It can be, I admitted. But it's also purposeful. I know why I'm doing each thing, and I know it matters. That makes the exhaustion worthwhile. He opened his notebook and started writing, his handwriting cramped and careful. What are you doing? I asked, amused. Taking notes, he said without looking up. You're teaching me about your world. I want to remember it. The simple act of him writing, of caring enough to document and learn, made my throat tight. We spent another hour in my office before I had to prepare for my 10:30. I introduced him to several colleagues who stopped by, each interaction adding another layer to his understanding. Commander Patricia Lee explained how my office coordinated with hers on fleet logistics. Captain James Morrison described a problem I'd helped him solve involving ammunition transport. Each person offered unprompted praise, unaware they were rebuilding my father's perception with every sentence. Before I walked him back to the exit, my father stood in the Pentagon courtyard, the massive building rising around us on all sides. This place is like a city, he said, overwhelmed. And you're one of the people making sure it functions. How did you learn to do all this? The same way you learned engines, I said. One problem at a time, one lesson building on another. Someone taught me, I practiced, I failed occasionally and learned from it, and eventually I got competent enough that they trusted me with more responsibility. It's not magic, Dad. It's just work, applied consistently over time. He looked at me then with an expression I'd never seen before, something between respect and regret and determination. I missed so much, he said quietly. Years of you building this, becoming this, and I was too stubborn to see it. I don't know how to make up for that. You're here now, I said. That's how you make up for it. You showed up, you asked questions, you listened. That's all I ever wanted, Dad. Not for you to understand everything immediately, just for you to try. The drive back to my house was companionable, my father processing everything he'd seen. At one point he said, that Lieutenant, Marcus, he respects you. Really respects you, not just because you're his boss. You could tell? I asked. I've managed people for 40 years, he said. I know what real respect looks like versus people just doing what they're told. He respects you because you're good at what you do and you treat people right. That's the same thing that matters in my shop, just in a different setting. The comparison pleased me more than it probably should have. Maybe our worlds weren't so different after all, I said. Maybe we've been focused on the surface differences and missed the underlying similarities. Leadership is leadership. Taking care of your people is taking care of your people. The uniform is just context. He chewed on that for a while, then said, I want to show you something. Can we stop by the shop? We detoured to Bakersfield, arriving at the familiar cinder block building as the afternoon stretched into early evening. The bay doors were open, 2 cars up on lifts, Victor and one of the new guys working while classic rock played from the ancient radio. My father led me past them to his office, a cramped space with a metal desk and filing cabinets and walls covered with calendars from parts suppliers. He pulled open a drawer and removed a box, old and battered, setting it on the desk between us. I've been going through some things, he said. Trying to understand where I went wrong with you, how I missed so much. He opened the box, and I saw it was filled with photographs, newspaper clippings, documents. My mother's collection, I realized immediately. Things she'd saved that my father had apparently never looked at. He pulled out items one by one. My commissioning announcement from the local paper, the photo tiny but unmistakable. A letter I'd written my mother from my first deployment, describing the ship and the crew and how much I loved the work. A program from a change of command ceremony where I'd taken over as executive officer, my mother's handwriting in the margin noting how proud she was. Award citations. Promotion announcements. A photocopy of my first published article in a naval journal. The accumulation of a career documented by someone who'd cared enough to keep track. She knew everything, my father said, his voice thick. She went to some of your ceremonies, did you know that? Told me she was visiting her sister, but she was really flying out to see you get promoted or receive awards. She kept all of this, and I never looked at it. Not once. I was too busy being angry that you weren't working in the shop to notice you were building something bigger. I picked up a photograph of my mother and me at my promotion to commander, both of us in front of the American flag, both wearing expressions of pure joy. I'd sent her the photo but hadn't known she'd printed and saved it. Seeing her face, seeing the pride there, made grief rise fresh and sharp. She believed in me, I said softly. Even when I doubted myself, she believed. She told me once, my father continued, maybe 3 months before she died, that I was going to regret not knowing you. Said I was choosing my pride over my daughter, and one day I'd understand what I'd lost. I told her she was being dramatic, that you and I were fine, we just had different interests. He laughed bitterly. She said, Vincent, you're a fool if you think having different interests means you can't love someone fully. Turns out she was right. I've been a fool for a very long time. He pushed the box toward me. This is yours. All of it. Your mother would want you to have it, and I want you to know that I'm done being blind. I'm done choosing pride over truth. I'm done wasting whatever time we have left. I picked up the box, heavy with the weight of my mother's love and documentation. Thank you, I said. This means everything. We stood there in that small office with the smell of motor oil and the sound of an impact wrench echoing from the bay, and I felt the last walls between us begin to crumble. Not demolished in a dramatic crash, but eroding steadily like water wearing stone. Victor appeared in the doorway, stopping short when he saw us. Everything okay? Yeah, my father said, his voice stronger than it had been. Everything's good. Come here, I want to tell you something. Victor entered cautiously, grease-stained and curious. My father put one hand on his shoulder and gestured to me with the other. Your sister is an admiral in the United States Navy. A flag officer, which means she's one of the highest-ranking people in the entire military. She runs operations that affect thousands of people, makes decisions that matter on a global scale, and I've spent 27 years too stupid to recognize it or respect it. Victor's eyes widened. Dad, you don't have to. I do have to, my father interrupted. I have to say it out loud where you can hear it, where she can hear it, where I can hear myself saying it. I was wrong about Diana. I was wrong about what constitutes real work and real success. I was wrong to make her feel like she had to hide who she was. And I'm going to spend whatever time I have left trying to be the father she deserved all along instead of the one she got stuck with. The shop had gone quiet, the music still playing, but the work stopped. The new guy I didn't know had wandered closer, sensing something important happening. Victor looked at me with something like apology in his own eyes, acknowledging his part in our father's dismissal of me, the times he'd stayed silent when he could have spoken up. It's okay, I said to both of them. We're figuring it out. That's what matters now. My father insisted on taking me to dinner at a steakhouse he claimed made the best ribeye in the Central Valley. Over meat and baked potatoes, he asked more questions about my career, about the challenges and rewards, about how I'd managed to rise in a field dominated by men, about what kept me motivated through the hard years. I answered as honestly as I could, not hiding the difficulties but not dwelling on them either, painting a picture of a career built on persistence and competence and refusing to accept that I didn't belong. You never quit, he observed. Even when it would have been easier, when I was telling you it wasn't worth it, you kept going. Where'd you get that stubbornness? From you, I said, smiling. You taught me that when something matters, you work until it's done. You taught me that quality counts, that doing things right is worth the extra effort, that you take pride in your work regardless of whether anyone notices. I learned all of that from you, Dad. I just applied it somewhere you didn't expect. He absorbed that, fork frozen halfway to his mouth. So even when I was tearing you down, I was accidentally building you up. Something like that, I agreed. The lessons were good even when the delivery was harsh. You taught me resilience by making me need it. Not ideal parenting, maybe, but effective in its own painful way. He set down his fork. I don't want that to be my legacy with you, he said. I don't want the lesson to be that I was useful only as an obstacle to overcome. Then change the legacy going forward, I suggested. Be the father who learned and grew, who admitted when he was wrong, who chose relationship over pride. That's a legacy worth leaving. We can't undo the past, but we can decide what the future looks like. He nodded slowly, determinedly. Okay, he said. Okay, that's what I'll do. The weeks that followed established a new pattern. My father called every Sunday evening, regular as clockwork, asking about my week and actually listening to the answers. He'd started reading the books I'd recommended, military history and leadership theory, struggling through concepts that didn't come naturally but persisting anyway. He asked clarifying questions that showed he was genuinely trying to understand, not just going through motions. When he didn't understand something, he admitted it rather than pretending or making jokes to cover his ignorance. I started visiting Bakersfield more regularly, bringing Lucas when his schedule allowed. My father and grandson had always been close, but now the conversations shifted. Instead of my father subtly undermining me to Lucas, he actively built me up. Did you know your mom led a rescue operation in Afghanistan? Do you know how many people your mom is responsible for? Your mom's being considered for her second star, Lucas, that's a huge deal. Lucas would catch my eye during these conversations, his expression somewhere between amused and grateful, recognizing the shift and appreciating it. Victor pulled me aside during one visit, his voice low. I don't know what you did, but Dad's different. Happier, maybe. More at peace. You didn't do anything wrong, I assured him. This isn't about you or Ramon failing somehow. It's just about Dad and me finding our way to each other finally. He nodded but looked relieved anyway, the tension of being caught between us easing. 3 months after the Pentagon tour, my father showed up at my house unannounced on a Saturday morning. I found him sitting on my front step, holding a flat package wrapped in brown paper. "I made something for you," he said without preamble. "Wasn't sure if you'd want it, but I made it anyway." I invited him in and made coffee while he unwrapped the package on my kitchen table. Inside was a wooden shadow box, beautifully crafted with careful joints and a glass front. Inside he'd arranged my medals and ribbons, the ones I'd kept in a drawer, along with photographs from my mother's collection. My commissioning photo, the change of command ceremonies, the picture of me on the flight deck. He'd created a visual timeline of my career, professional and personal, everything I'd kept hidden now displayed with pride. "I spent 2 weeks building it," he said, uncertain. "Asked Victor to help with the design since he's better with finish work. Wanted it to be worthy of what it holds. If you don't like it, I can take it back, make adjustments." "It's perfect," I managed through tears. "Dad, it's absolutely perfect." "Where did you learn to do this?" "Same place I learned everything else," he said. "Trial and error. Watched some YouTube videos, practiced on scrap wood until I got it right. Figured if you could learn to run naval operations, I could learn basic woodworking beyond what the shop requires." I hung it in my living room that afternoon, in a place where visitors would see it immediately upon entering. The first time Lucas saw it, he stopped and stared. "Grandpa made this?" When I nodded, he pulled out his phone and took pictures. "Natalie's going to love this. She's been saying your house needed more personal touches, more of you visible in it." "This is perfect, Mom. This is you." The promotion to Rear Admiral upper half came through in early spring, announced with the formality that high-level promotions required. My father was the first person I called after Lucas. "I got it," I said when he answered. 2 stars. The ceremony is in 6 weeks at the Navy Memorial in Washington. I'd really like you to be there." The silence on the other end lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "Then, I'll be there," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Front row if they'll let me. I'm so proud of you, Diana. So incredibly proud." The ceremony itself was held on a clear April morning, the plaza filled with colleagues and friends and family. My father sat in the front row wearing his best suit, flanked by Victor and Ramon who'd flown in for the occasion. Lucas stood in his dress whites as part of the honor guard, and Natalie sat with the Brennans, all of them witnesses to this milestone. General Hartford administered the oath, and my father stepped forward when invited to pin on the 2nd star. His hands shook slightly as he removed the single star from my shoulder board and replaced it with the 2-star insignia. "This is an honor," he whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. "Thank you for letting me be part of it." "Thank you for being here," I whispered back. "Thank you for seeing me finally." The reception afterward was held at a nearby hotel, and I watched my father work the room with growing confidence. He talked to admirals and captains and commanders with the same straightforward honesty he used with customers at his shop, asking questions and telling stories and representing our family with unexpected grace. At one point I overheard him talking to a young ensign who'd asked what it was like being an admiral's father. "Honestly," my father said, "I wouldn't know. I spent most of her career being her father without knowing she was an admiral. Just found out a few months ago." The ensign looked confused, and my father continued. "I was too proud and too stubborn to see what was right in front of me. Took me almost 3 decades to pull my head out and recognize what she'd built. So if you're asking for parenting advice, here it is: pay attention to your kids. Really pay attention. Ask questions. Listen to the answers. Don't assume you know their story just because you think you know them." He glanced over and caught me listening, smiled self-consciously. "But I'm learning. That's what matters now." That evening, after the guests had departed and the official responsibilities were complete, my father and I sat in my backyard with glasses of whiskey, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "You did good today," he said. "That ceremony, the speech you gave, the way people responded to you. Your mother would have been so proud she'd be insufferable about it." I laughed. She would have told everyone in Bakersfield. Probably would have taken out an ad in the paper. Definitely would have, he agreed. He sipped his whiskey. I've been thinking about something. About what you said months ago, about real work. You were right. Real work isn't about what you can touch or fix with your hands. It's about what you build that matters, whether that's an engine or a career or a life. I built a decent business, and I'm proud of that. But you built something bigger. You built a legacy of leadership, of people you've influenced and helped. That's real work too. Maybe the realest kind. They're both real, I said. Different expressions of the same underlying values. Hard work, integrity, taking care of people, doing quality work that matters. You taught me those values, Dad. I just found a different place to apply them. He nodded, accepting the truth of it finally. We sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd found their way across a long distance, who'd chosen to build something new rather than remain prisoners of old patterns. The journey wasn't complete, might never be complete, but we were walking it together now, and that made all the difference. Above us, stars wheeled through their ancient patterns, indifferent to human reconciliation but bearing witness anyway. Somewhere in that vast darkness, satellites carried communications that kept fleets coordinated, that let sailors call home, that connected the world in ways my father was only beginning to understand. Somewhere out there, his daughter's work rippled outward in waves that would never fully be measured. But here, in this backyard with whiskey and starlight and hard-won understanding, the measure that mattered was simpler. A father and daughter, finally seeing each other clearly, finally building the relationship that should have existed all along. That was enough. That was everything. 2 years passed in the way time does when you're finally living honestly, faster somehow because you're not spending energy maintaining pretense. My father became a fixture at naval events when I invited him, always asking intelligent questions now, always listening with genuine interest. He'd started volunteering at a veteran center in Bakersfield, using his mechanical skills to help former service members with car repairs they couldn't afford. It was his way, he told me, of serving the people who'd served, of connecting to the military world that had claimed his daughter. We established rituals that became the foundation of our rebuilt relationship. Sunday phone calls that stretched into hour-long conversations. Monthly dinners where we took turns choosing the restaurant and the topic of discussion. Holidays spent together without the underlying tension that had poisoned previous gatherings. Lucas and Natalie's first child, a daughter they named Christina after my mother, became the bridge that connected generations in ways that healed old wounds simply by existing. The day my father met his great-granddaughter, he held her with a gentleness I'd rarely seen, tears streaming down his weathered face. She's got your mother's eyes, he told me. And hopefully her grandmother's wisdom to see people clearly from the start. I held my tongue about the irony, but he caught the look and smiled ruefully. Okay, I deserve that. But I'm trying to break the cycle. This little one is going to know her great-grandfather sees her for exactly who she is, whatever that turns out to be. True to his word, he'd changed in ways that went beyond our relationship. Victor told me their father had become gentler with customers, more patient with the young mechanics, quicker to praise and slower to criticize. He'd started asking Victor about his interests beyond the shop, actually listening when his son talked about his passion for photography or his wife's career in education. The transformation wasn't complete, old habits surfaced occasionally, but the trajectory was undeniable. He'd learned that seeing people clearly required setting aside your own expectations, and he was practicing that lesson everywhere. At Christina's baptism, my father gave a toast that silenced the room. He spoke about the importance of recognizing people for who they truly are rather than who we want them to be. He talked about wasted years and hard-learned lessons and the grace of second chances. He looked directly at me when he said that the greatest gift a parent can give is the willingness to admit they were wrong and the courage to change. There wasn't a dry eye in the room when he finished. Later, Natalie's father Richard pulled me aside. "Your father is a remarkable man," he said. "To change that fundamentally at his age, to admit error so publicly and work to correct it, that takes real strength. You come from good people, Diana. I'm glad our families are joined." The validation from him meant something I hadn't expected. The Brennans had accepted me fully, inviting me to family events and business dinners, treating me as one of their own. But hearing Richard praise my father, seeing the respect in his eyes, felt like the final piece of acceptance clicking into place. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was in a budget meeting. My father had collapsed at the shop, a heart attack that the paramedics said he was lucky to survive. I caught the next flight to California, arriving at the hospital to find him weak but conscious, hooked to monitors that beeped their steady reassurance. Victor and Ramon sat in chairs pulled close to his bed, their faces drawn with fear. "Don't look at me like I'm dying," my father rasped when I entered. "It'll take more than a bum ticker to finish me off." But his hand when I took it was cold and fragile, the hand of a man confronting mortality whether he wanted to or not. The doctors recommended surgery, a bypass that would buy him years if successful. He agreed without his usual bluster, and I saw fear in his eyes for the first time in my memory. The night before the surgery, I sat alone with him after visiting hours, the nurse having taken pity and allowed me to stay. We didn't talk much, just sat together in the dim room with machines humming and the distant sounds of the hospital settling into its night rhythm. Eventually he said, "If something goes wrong tomorrow, I need you to know I died happy. These last couple years, getting to really know you, being part of your life in a real way, that's been the best time of my 76 years. I don't have regrets anymore, Diana." That's a hell of a gift to give someone like me who spent decades collecting them. "Nothing's going wrong," I said firmly. "You're going to wake up from surgery annoyed about the hospital food and demanding to know when you can get back to the shop. But thank you for saying it. It means everything." He squeezed my hand. "I love you," he said simply. "Always have, even when I was too stupid to show it right." "I love you too, Dad," I replied. "Now rest. You've got work to do tomorrow, and you taught me that you show up prepared." The surgery went well, and his recovery was slow but steady. During his convalescence, he stayed at my house where I could monitor him and enforce the doctor's orders about rest and diet. We watched old movies together, played cards, talked about everything and nothing. It was the most time we'd spent together since I was a child, and I treasured every frustrating, boring, precious moment of it. One afternoon, he asked me to read to him from a book about naval history he'd been working through. As I read about fleet operations in the Pacific during World War II, he interrupted occasionally with questions that showed he'd been paying attention, connecting the historical accounts to things I'd told him about modern naval operations. "You really love this," he observed. "The Navy, the work, all of it. I can hear it in your voice when you explain things." "I do," I admitted. "It gave me purpose, structure, a place where I belonged. It gave me the chance to lead and serve and make a difference. I've been lucky, Dad. Not everyone finds work that feeds their soul." "You found it too," he said. "In your shop, working with your hands, building something tangible. We're not so different after all, just took us a long time to recognize it." Before he moved back to Bakersfield, he pulled me aside. "I'm changing my will," he said. "The shop goes to Victor and Ramon like we always planned. But I'm setting up a scholarship fund in your mother's name for kids who want to join the military but need help with expenses. I want you to run it, decide who gets the money. Your mother would love knowing her memory helps kids follow paths their parents might not understand." The gesture overwhelmed me with its thoughtfulness, its recognition that honoring my mother meant supporting the choice I'd made, the path she'd always celebrated. Months later, standing at the first scholarship award ceremony, watching a young woman from Bakersfield accept funding to attend the Naval Academy, I saw my father in the audience beaming with pride. He'd invited half the town, it seemed, wanting everyone to see what the money was doing, who it was helping. After the ceremony, person after person came up to him, offering congratulations and sharing their own military connections. He'd become, in his way, an ambassador for service, using his platform to build bridges between the civilian and military worlds. That evening, driving him home, he said something that stayed with me. "You know what I learned from all this? Real strength isn't refusing to change. Real strength is being willing to change when you realize you're wrong. I spent 74 years thinking I had to be right, had to know everything, had to never admit weakness. Turns out I was weak the whole time, too scared to face the truth. You made me strong, Diana. By refusing to stay hidden, by insisting I see you clearly, you gave me the chance to become better. That's leadership right there. If you take nothing else from hearing about our journey, take this: the people in your life deserve to be seen for who they truly are, not who you've decided they should be. Your children, your parents, your colleagues, everyone. We all carry hidden depths, accomplishments, and struggles that might not be visible on the surface. The person you've dismissed might be extraordinary in ways you haven't bothered to discover. The quiet one might be a leader. The different one might be exactly what your family needs. My father and I lost years to stubbornness and pride and the inability to see past our own expectations. We can't get those years back, but we redeemed them by choosing differently going forward. By choosing honesty over pretense, curiosity over assumption, relationship over being right. If there's someone in your life you've misjudged, someone you've diminished or dismissed, it's not too late. Start asking questions. Start listening to answers. Start seeing them as they are rather than as you've decided they must be. The greatest gift my father gave me in the end wasn't an apology, though that mattered. It wasn't attendance at ceremonies or the handmade shadow box, though those touched my heart. It was his willingness to change, to admit error, to rebuild our relationship on truth instead of comfortable lies. That took more courage than anything I'd done in uniform, and I'll spend the rest of my life grateful for it. We're all works in progress, my father and me included. But progress only happens when you're willing to face uncomfortable truths and do the hard work of transformation. That's the real story here, not the rank or the revelation, but the choice two people made to see each other clearly and love what they found. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.